Hi, and welcome back. We are in Mark chapter 1, verses 14 through 28. In this section, Jesus returns from the wilderness. He makes his first proclamation of the gospel. He gathers his first followers, and he goes to the synagogue for the first time and exorcises a demon. So let's talk about all of this and how it fits together within the story that Mark wants to tell. Now remember, Mark is trying to keep Jesus' identity somewhat secret. We don't have backstory. We don't know who he is, where he comes from. He's just a man who showed up. We don't even know his hometown. Jesus comes back out of the wilderness at the time that John is imprisoned. Now, this is important on two levels. Number one, John being imprisoned shows us that all of God's prophets, all of God's messengers are rejected by worldly authorities, by the kingdoms and the powers, that the people who are in charge of the government. That's who's rejecting God's messengers. And so John being rejected and put into prison, well, that's what we should expect. But it also means that the stage is set for Jesus to rise and to come on the scene. John's work has finished. He who was supposed to prepare the way for God, or for God's messenger in this case, he's done. He's prepared. Everything's ready. All we need is Jesus to come on the scene and take charge. So we do. We get Jesus to come on the scene, and the first thing he does is proclaim his message. Now, John's message had been repent, for the kingdom is near. Jesus' message is make yourselves ready because the kingdom is here. It is now. Now, I used kingdom there. I like to, if I think about it, use the word reign instead of kingdom, the reign of God or the reign of heaven if we're in Matthew, because the emphasis is not on a geographical region. It's on God's authority. So the idea of a kingdom is a geographical idea. It is a place that is ruled. A reign or a rule is about the power that the person in charge provides or has. So the reign of God. Jesus is saying to the people that the reign of God is here. Now notice what John does. He has Jesus at his first activity is a preacher, but not an elaborate preacher. It's a very simplistic message. And the message is, come to me. I represent God's rule and reign here on earth. But that's it. That's the entirety of the message. Why? Because Jesus isn't about just preaching the way we think of preaching. He's not just about standing up and giving a message or a sermon like we see in Matthew at the Sermon on the Mount. Not that Jesus didn't do that, but John doesn't want you to have this idea that that's who Jesus is. Not yet. That's one element. But John wants you to see that Jesus he proclaims. And then his first real activity is to go by the lake and to find people who can follow him. Simon and Andrew, James and John. Now, these four individuals are fishermen. That is not a profession that one would typically associate with somebody following a rabbi. Also, it is not typical for a rabbi to go call their students out of anywhere. It is typical that people who want to follow a rabbi, they follow and ask the rabbi, can I follow you? That's normal. So what Jesus is doing here when he calls his first disciples is abnormal. It is also the kind of people he is looking for, these very average blue-collar types. That's not usual. That's out of the ordinary. But what it shows us is that Jesus is not looking for the typical religious person. He's looking for somebody whose everyday life is going to reflect his message that the kingdom of God is here. He's looking for somebody who can take on this mantle, not just of theological instruction, but of living the life of the kingdom. That's why he calls James and John and Simon and Andrew, and not somebody who wants to be a Pharisee. Because the people who wanted to be Pharisees wanted to be in charge. They wanted to have religious power. They wanted to have theological training and education to escape the everyday and not enter the everyday. Jesus wants somebody who will enter the everyday, so he calls these four. Or at least that's who Mark presents us with first. But it shows us who Jesus is. It shows us his character, his approach to life. He who is going to proclaim the message that the kingdom is now, the reign of God is now, is looking for people who can fit that kingdom into their everyday. That reign, they are going to allow that reign to govern their everyday existence, not somebody who's going to be a theologically astute individual. Kind of tells us about the approach of Jesus. From there, Jesus goes into the synagogue, and this is great. So again, we have Jesus who proclaims his message. He then calls disciples, and now he's going to be a teacher. He's gone from somebody who is proclaiming the message of God to surrounding himself with people to a teacher. And he's going to teach in the synagogue. That's what he's trying to do. Now, to teach in the synagogue means that he has some familiarity both with Capernaum and with the scrolls that he's going to teach. In other words, the people of that town, and it was a relatively decent-sized town. It relatively speaking, it was kind of a center of population. It was not a big city by any stretch of the imagination, but it was a good-sized town. And to be allowed to teach in the synagogue means Jesus had shown himself in some way to be worthy of teaching. In other words, the people who were in charge of the synagogue would not just let anybody teach. They would have had him, they would have talked to him, they would have known him. So the idea that Jesus is given this authority to teach in that synagogue means he's known in this community. It allows us to understand that Jesus is home in some way, but it also means, it also defines who Jesus sees himself, or how Jesus sees himself and what he sees his ministry as. His ministry is teaching, which I know for some people, education is a sour subject, because for some people, they think of education kind of like this, where I do all the talking and you do all the listening. But education done well, and even in the synagogue context, was as much about Jesus giving his idea and then listening and then asking questions and participating with a person in their education, not just a lecture where he was going to dictate to them what the world, how the world works and what the Bible means. This education was much more about encountering people where they were and helping them grow in the lifestyle that God wanted. So Jesus, his idea of being a teacher is not simply about telling us all the right things to do and kind of lording it over us that he knows how to act and we don't. Rather, it's about working with us so that we grow in God's likeness. And that's what he meant to do that Saturday morning. His teaching got interrupted because of a demon. And even for us today, demons, we have this concept of demons, but I dare say that most of us in the modern Western world do not live with the practical reality of demons. We do not live with the expectation of witnessing an exorcism. But for Jesus's community, this would have been something that they expected, or at least would not be shocked by. But the exorcisms that they were used to would have been much more formulaic, where the demon is seen to be possessing somebody, and the exorcist would use this formula, this incantation, maybe some sort of physical physical help, aid, such as incense or something. They would have this process of exorcising the demon, kind of like what you see in the movie The Exorcism, where the priest engages the demon, goes through the whole ritual, and tries to expel the demon. That's what people would have been used to. What Jesus does is just says to the demon, be quiet and come out. And I actually had a vision. I have a picture of Jesus sitting in the synagogue, hearing this person rant and rave, understanding that it's a demonic possession, and very calmly and quietly looking at that person and saying, be quiet and come out of him. And we see in this picture, the demon tries to resist. That's the shaking. That's the screams. The screams are the demon trying to disobey Jesus and talk. The shaking is the demon trying to hold on to possession when Jesus has said no. And what it shows us is that where normal people need some level of incantation and ritual to do this work, Jesus just calmly addresses the demon and it responds to him. And it says something about Jesus's power and authority that the demon's just going to respond to him that way. We also see that the demon tries to identify who Jesus is. And this is, to me, this is kind of the fun. This is the most fun element of this little part of Jesus in the synagogue, because the question is, why is the demon trying to identify Jesus? There's a few different reasons that I can think of. Number one is naming something gives you an element of power over it. You know something about the person or the thing if you can name it. And in ritualized magic and in other elements of the Bible, we see naming as very important. It is a symbol of authority in the Bible. And so if this demon can name Jesus, maybe it's trying to claim some authority over Jesus, but Jesus has none of it. It could be that the demon is trying to identify Jesus in order to give Jesus authority in the community, but not the right authority. I mean, think about it. What would happen in first century Israel, first century Judea, first century Palestine, however you want to word this region that Jesus is in? What would it do to people if this demon is able to identify Jesus as the Messiah, as this anointed one, the one who has come from God? Well, it makes Jesus a celebrity. Now, obviously, Jesus' expelling of this demon is going to make him a minor celebrity no matter what, because many people will be in that synagogue, and they will rush home and they will tell their friends what happened. So no matter what, Jesus is going to be a minor celebrity. But if the demon identifies him as the Messiah, that's going to not just make Jesus a minor celebrity for his ability to exorcise demons. It's going to make him a major celebrity, because all of a sudden people are going to have this mindset about what the Messiah is about. They're going to put Jesus into their category of who is the Messiah. And they're going to say, wow, this guy, he's the Messiah. He is the next ruler, the next king of Israel. Not in the sense that we usually take that, not in the sense that Jesus has just said the reign of God is here, but king in the sense that Herod was king, the physical ruler of the physical nation, the one who needs the army. So there may be that this demon is trying to claim power over Jesus. It might also be that he's trying to thwart Jesus's ministry. by identifying Jesus and allowing people's misconceptions about Jesus to rule, at least in their own minds, even if Jesus fights it. But that also means that it makes more work for Jesus, because if people say he's the Messiah and they have a misconception about that, he has to undo that misconception before he can actually work with them. So the demon may be trying to play a trick on the crowd by identifying Jesus. Either way, Jesus leaves the synagogue with a bunch of shocked people. One man who is undoubtedly very grateful, and he has a whole group of people who are now, like we should be, asking the question, who is this man that has such authority over demons? It's the same man who proclaims that God's reign is now among us. Anyway, I hope that was helpful for you. If you have any questions or comments, please drop them. Let me know. I'd love to deal with those. Next time we will continue finish up Mark chapter 1. So have a blessed day.